So we did drop a fair amount. We're normally at 44 and we are at 40 3/4. Holy smokes, is this thing dirty. Winter is almost over. Almost. Ugh. Let's give her a bath. What is going on today, guys? My name's Alex. Welcome back to the channel. Today we are talking about payload numbers for these Ram 2500s, specifically my Power Wagon. As some of you may know, the Power Wagon payload number is very small in comparison to your standard 2500 truck. Now there's a couple reasons for that, which we'll go over. But first of all, we're gonna load this thing up and see how much that rear end sinks with just about 1,500 pounds of payload. Yes, you heard that right. This Ram 2500 has only 1,500 pounds of payload. In fact, it's actually a little bit less. It's 1,483 pounds. Now, a lot of your 1,500 trucks probably have a higher rated payload. And like I said, I will get to the reason why this Power Wagon has such a low payload. So first of all, we're gonna back this thing out of the wash bay and we'll bring it around the building there. We have some old used batteries, and lead acid batteries, well, they're lead and they're a lot of weight. So they're gonna be great to weigh this thing down. We'll start stacking them in the back of the truck. It actually won't take that many. And then we'll bring this truck over the pit and we can take a look at the suspension when it's fully loaded and see if the axle is actually on the bump stops or not. Earlier this year, I made a video maxing out my Ram 1500's payload. With the max payload on that truck, the rear axle was actually sitting on the bump stop. So we'll see whether or not the Power Wagon in behind this bus here does the same thing. So the yard is a little bit soft. We're just coming to the end of winter here and everything's starting to melt. Which means the ground is no longer frozen, but in fact it is mud. Now what I might also do is just run this thing around the yard here, unload it, and then I'll load it up for you guys, and you guys can see, you know, just how much this thing sinks when it's driving around. I think that'd be kind of interesting. Now, if you're unsure of your truck's payload, there should always be a sticker on the driver's side door. This has your GVW as well as your axle ratings. This sticker right here should have your max cargo, yeah, right here. So 1,483 pounds. Now, it's important to look at that because each truck is spec'd differently, which means it weighs different amounts when it comes off the factory line. For example, a quick Google search would say that the Power Wagon max payload is 1,530 pounds, which I believed it to be until I double checked the sticker, and indeed it's actually a little bit less. I got my tape measure out. It's 44 inches from the ground up to here when I measured it last. So when we're on the pit and it's even ground, we'll take a measurement and see how far this thing freaking drops. Okay, so all the lead is in the bed here. I did just realize that obviously with my weight in the truck, that'll be at the max payload. But when I'm out here filming and underneath the truck, I will not be in the truck. So I have to add another 200 pounds. And those brake drums right there are 95 pounds each. So I'll put a couple of those in and we should be all set. So we are loaded up. We got 1,250 pounds worth of lead and batteries. We got another 180 pounds worth of metal in these drums, and we got 140 pounds of metal in these drums. So we got about 1,550 pounds, so slightly over the actual rated value. I mean, damn, she kind of looks good a little squatted. Not too shabby. So with me in the truck there's probably closer to 1,800 pounds worth of weight in the truck. So we were able to put the truck over the pit, not in the pit. Always a good start. I actually don't mind this look. But no, I think it makes the truck look a little bit mean, a little bit aggressive with some weight in the back. I don't know, maybe it's just me. Without me in the truck, we're probably sitting around 1,550, 1,600 pounds, depending on how much my stuff weighs actually in the truck. So we are just a little bit over the max payload, but we're gonna get underneath there and see what the suspension is doing. All right, so these are your coils. This is mainly what keeps the truck lifted. Obviously you have your shocks, one there and one there. Those more or less just control the axle sway, but this is what the weight is mostly resting on, these coils right here, and the other one's right there. But what I was curious about was the bump stops, and as you guys can see, we have about 1 inch of room left until this axle is completely maxed out, which I was not expecting. And then this side over here, looks like we actually even have more than 1 inch, probably 1.25 inches there. Now our front axle has probably stayed the similar height, maybe dropped a little bit, but probably not. There's our axle. So yeah, probably about 3, maybe even 3.5, 4 inches there of room. So plenty of room on the front axle, and we expect that. Most of the weight is in the back. It is pretty cool to see when this truck is actually technically overloaded. We do still have some room for some suspension, which is always nice to see. Now, when I maxed out the payload on my 2017 Ram 1500, I actually had about the same weight, about 1,500 pounds in the truck. And when I crawled underneath, the axle was actually bottomed out. The bump stop was right on the frame. So this bump stop is literally touching the axle, which means this thing is actually pretty much bottomed out, which is kind of crazy. And there was no room really for suspension travel other than the actual rubber bushing on the bump stop there, which I really didn't like to see because I was more or less within spec of that truck and I was right on the bump stops, whereas this truck, we're about 100 pounds give or take overloaded, and we still have room for suspension movement, which is nice to see. So we did drop a fair amount. We're normally at 44 and we are at 40 3/4, let's call it. So we're only at 42, but you can see the front end is about 1.75 inches higher than the rear, giving it that little bit of a squat. So there you go. This Ram 2500 Power Wagon handles its max payload pretty well, I think, and you could probably get away with putting a little more weight in there, probably close to 2,000 pounds, and it would be okay. You might actually get closer to bottoming out that rear axle at that weight. However, like we saw in my Ram 1500, even though it was technically within spec, the rear axle was still bottomed out, which I was not really too fond about. And that actually brings me to a good point. A lot of people see the payload numbers and towing numbers on the Power Wagons and assume that, you know, the truck has the same capabilities as a Ram 1500. And although on paper, yes, technically that may be true, there is more to that picture. This truck still has a heavy duty frame. It still has a very heavy duty rear axle. The box is the same box on a Ram 2500. It still is technically a heavy duty truck. Unfortunately, the suspension is lighter duty. So that's the difference. And that's why I would feel more confident overloading this truck than my Ram 1500. So here's a good comparison. With about the same weight, the Ram 1500 only has about 3 inches until the wheel is going to be into the fender, whereas the Power Wagon still has about 8 or 9 inches of room until the wheel is going to be into the fender. Also, when driving the Ram 1500 with that weight, it's clearly bottomed out and it just looks unhealthy despite being fully within spec. Whereas the Power Wagon, it does look loaded when driving, but the truck doesn't look anywhere near as stressed out as the 1500 does with the weight. Keeping in mind that the Ram 1500 was rated for about 100 pounds more payload than the Power Wagon. You know, that rear axle alone is rated for like 6,200 pounds. So the axle is not even close to being overloaded. This rear axle on the 2500s is a full floating axle, whereas the Ram 1500s have a semi-floating axle. What does that mean? Well, basically on a full floating, there's two sets of bearings on the inner and on the outer, meaning that there's actually no weight on the physical axle. It's all on the axle housing. Whereas a Ram 1500 is a semi-floating, so there's bearings on the outside, but there is still going to be weight on the actual axle. Again, what does all that mean? It means that this axle can take a lot more weight and not risk being damaged, whereas on a 1500 with only the semi-floating axle, it just can't handle as much load. And then continuing talking about axles, the front axle on a 2500 is a solid front axle, which again is just stronger, whereas in your Ram 1500s you have your independent front suspension, which is just a lighter duty setup. Nothing wrong with it, but it's just not rated for as much weight, and it's just not as strong. And this front axle is actually rated for more weight load than the rear axle on a 1500. I'm sure there's not even stress on the frame yet, whereas a Ram 1500, I believe the rear axle is only rated for like 4,000 pounds and the frame is lighter duty. So there are more things that come into play, you know, when you're comparing the Power Wagon to a 1500. Now, despite maybe being able to drive this truck on the road overloaded without much issue, is it a smart idea to do so? And the answer is probably not. You know, if you're just going up the road to your buddies or you're not driving too far, who cares? You know what I mean? Odds are you're going to be okay. The real problem is not the truck breaking down. I'm sure you could load this thing up with 3,000 pounds, drive, you know, 20 minutes up the road, it'd be fine. The problem is if you got into an accident. You know, if you got into an accident and they found out that the truck was overloaded, well, in most situations, your insurance would be voided and you would be at fault for the accident, which is just not a good situation. So if you are going to be, you know, hauling some stuff pretty fair distance, or if you have a trailer that's yours that you're going to be hauling, you know, pretty consistently, it might be a good idea to take your truck and trailer to the scales and just kind of figure out your numbers, because like I mentioned earlier, the axles have weight ratings, and that is also on your driver's side door, front and rear axles, as well as your GVW, tongue weight, all that fun stuff. So I would encourage everyone, if you're going to be towing consistently or if you're towing for a long distance, hit the scales and, you know, just make sure you're within spec on your numbers. Well guys, as always, I hope you liked the frickin' video. I was actually not planning on getting a physical workout today. I was hoping to get a 1,000-liter water tote and simply just filling it with water. It would have been a lot easier, but I'm gonna get one next week. And then when I get that water tote, we are gonna be comparing some payloads for a bunch of trucks, obviously a Ram 1500. We are also gonna be comparing the Power Wagon to an actual Ram 2500 with the Cummins in it, which I'm very excited about to see, you know, the differences in squat, how much weight you can actually put in that real 2500, you know, to get it to squat 3 inches like this truck did, as well as potentially doing a 3500. So I'm excited. Should be a couple good payload videos upcoming. And as always, if you guys like the video, don't forget to leave that thumbs up. And if you like cool stuff like this, don't forget to subscribe. I have a wonderful workout ahead of me. I gotta now unload this truck and go edit this video. But anyways, enough of me. See you guys in the next freaking video.